Good afternoon, everyone. So we're very happy to have you join us for our Vanderbilt University and Vanderbilt University Medical Center Onramp event. I'm Ashley Crane with the All of Us Research Program Data and Research Center at Vanderbilt University Medical Center and your MC for this event. Please be advised that this event will be recorded. Please stay on mute with your camera off. Before we begin and go over a few housekeeping notes, we will have a short video about the All of Us Research Program to share with you.
The All of Us Research Program is a national effort to create the most in-depth and largest clinical study that has ever been done. A resource that has more diversity, more clinical data, and more genetic data than any other resource that has ever been created.
If you are a researcher that wants to look at diverse populations, participating in the All of Us Researcher Workbench is where you're able to do that.
We're combining both biological data with data around social determinants of health and environmental and lifestyle.
Things like healthcare access, socioeconomic status.
We're getting ready to expand the data set to include genomic data on a large number of our participants and some data around the COVID-19 crisis. And over time, the data will expand and get richer, and it will start to track the lifespan of individuals in our study.
I was very interested in the diversity of the patients and individuals who are represented in the database.
Latinx communities, African American communities, all of which are underserved with respect to research.
And that data has undergone some transformation to ensure privacy protections are in place for participants.
It's not complete if we don't also really emphasize the access to the data and that the communities themselves can, represent their own health outcomes and interests through researchers from within those communities.
Certain communities may carry a disproportionate burden of disease, but without researchers from those same communities being able to ask the most relevant questions or being able to access that kind of data, it can be very difficult to make advancements.
We know how important it is for our populations to be involved in this research.
A researcher can get access to the tools and the data they need to conduct a project with our resources in as little as 2 hours once their institutional data use agreement is signed.
There's a publicly available data browser to see whether All of Us offers data related to the condition or populations of interest to that particular researcher.
We're building this for researchers from across the spectrum, from all levels of their career, from all institutions. We're bringing them to the table. We're designing it with them.
Anytime I asked a question, the support team would get back to me very quickly. They're adaptive and responsive to feedback.
It's key to understanding how we can improve, what data elements we should consider prioritizing, what analytical tools we should consider prioritizing.
It's really critical that we bring folks to the data, make it easy and accessible to them, and allow all of the brightest minds in this country to be able to ask the questions that are so important.
Collaboration is absolutely critical. It opens new doors and creates new ideas, new perceptions, and new interpretations of data.
We're creating a community of researchers. Our data set could be the place that people meet.
That was the aha moment, is that my idea doesn't have to stop with me. Even if I may not be the person that does the analysis or knows how to do all of those sort of things, I do have the idea. I have the concept. And so I feel like that collaboration between researcher and with a community-based, as I call myself, researcher, that science team is very, very important for our communities.
I look forward to seeing more opportunities where we can leverage the interest of our research community as well as things that are going on that may affect our participants.
The promise here is equitable access to data, equitable access to information that can help in the careers of researchers with the most diverse and participant-forward precision health study to date.
The All of Us Research Program will be the first step in generating new discoveries that will translate into patient care.
Please note that we will be recording this webinar. Your microphone was muted and camera was turned off upon entry. Please stay on mute with your camera off, except during the Q&A if you have a question. Please enter any questions or comments you have in the Q&A box so that our help desk team can answer them or so they can be addressed during the Q&A portion of this webinar. We would love to have your feedback on today's presentation. Please take a moment to fill out our survey. And you can find our link here. We offer a quarterly newsletter on updates and news. If you would like to sign up for the newsletter, please follow this link. And we will be sharing the slide deck and video with everyone. We begin the event with an introduction by Dr. Paul Harris. Paul Harris, PhD, is a professor of biomedical informatics with secondary appointments in biostatistics and biomedical informatics. Dr. Harris serves as corresponding PI for the All of Us Data and Research Center, and he serves as director of the Vanderbilt University Medical Center Office of Research Informatics. He is also the creator of REDCap and Research Match. Dr. Harris received a PhD degree in biomedical engineering from Vanderbilt University and has significant experience working in the field of clinical and translational research informatics. He is an elected fellow in the American College of Medical Informatics and in the International Academy of Health Science Informatics. Dr. Harris?
Thanks, Ashley. And thanks everyone for attending today. We've been excited about this event for some time. I want to welcome you on behalf of my co-PI for the Data and Research Center here at Vanderbilt, Dan Roden, and also two additional co-PIs, one at the Broad Institute, Anthony Philippakis, and one at Verily, David Glazer. We've been working on this initiative at Vanderbilt since before 2015, I think, but I love this picture and this quote from President Obama in 2015 that my hope is that this becomes the foundation, the architecture whereby in 10 years from now, we can look back and say that we have revolutionized medicine. We're a little over 5 years into that, and I think we're well on our way to revolutionizing the way medical research is done. It's an exciting program. We have a large group at Vanderbilt that has spent a great deal of time on this initiative, and we're excited to share it with our research community today with the idea that we would love for Vanderbilt and Meharry and all affiliated researchers to make the best use of this data asset and facilities asset as possible in doing your own research. Next slide. So, the goal, sort of the shorthand goal has always been to get 1 million patients or 1 million participants in that are diverse and representative, although maybe not statistically, matching the exact population of the country, directionally representative, and whenever possible, overrepresenting those that are underserved. And in underserved minority categories. And that has been intentional from the beginning. And I think it is a big part of why we're different as a program is that intentionality. We've been live in collecting information like physical measures, survey data, EHR data that feeds through various program sites, which I'll mention in a moment, digital devices, and biosamples. Currently, we're at approximately 411,000 participants. About 253,000 of those have electronic health records. About 314,000 have biosamples. And a little under 300,000 have completed initial steps of the program. And this is really important, the bottom right-hand corner. 50% of that population is made up from racial and ethnic minorities, and 80%, when you think about age and rural versus urban categories, 80% of the participant population would be in what we would call underrepresented biomedical research categories. Next slide. So we have a grant here at Vanderbilt, the Data and Research Center, with those partners I mentioned earlier. And a big part of what we do is operational support and infrastructure for the program. But the part that we're going to talk about today is not that. The part that we're going to talk about today is the really exciting one, where we take that data that have been volunteered by the participant community under consent, and we get that data in. We ingest it into our data warehouse group here. That goes into a facility or an architecture that we call the raw data repository. We organize it. That means we sort of send it through a cleaning and curation pipeline. And that happens about once every 6 months. But the output of that is what we would call a curated data repository. And then we make it useful. And that making it useful is what we're going to spend most of our time on today. As was mentioned in the video that we just saw, it's a new model where we're trying to bring the researchers to the data rather than sending the data to the researchers. And in that new model, we've built a lot of cloud-based platform resources and assets that we feel do indeed make the program useful. And that's again what we're hoping as an end result. You and your colleagues will see fit to join the program. There is no cost to join the program and check it out from a research perspective. Next slide. So this was a very busy slide. I won't go into much detail other than just to sort of visually show you the partnership model. So if you're going to recruit 1 million people across the U.S. and collect biosamples and do physical measures and all of the work that we just mentioned and more that you can imagine would be important in putting a program like this together, there are a lot of partners. So as I mentioned earlier, one of our big roles in the DRC is to sort of get that data in, shape it, sometimes for operations and sometimes for, always for research as well. Next slide. Data curation process kind of looks like this in a very simplified schematic. We take all of those data sources, we harmonize those, link the data to itself, at the individual level, we do a lot of data refinements. We do some de-identification along the way. That's an obfuscation for privacy reasons along the way. And then that sort of lands in this curated data repository that, again, is refreshed about every 6 months. With that, we also publish a data dictionary on the website, and then we roll it into the research workbench. Next slide. This is going to be my last slide because it's a really nice transition to the next talk, where we're talking specifically about the Research Hub. But again, that's exciting. I've been in biomedical research a long time. I love the infrastructure stuff. I love the databases, et cetera. But unless you can get it in the hands of really, really smart researchers like yourself, it really doesn't realize its potential. And so we're excited about what we built. We're excited about the fact that the data are growing every day, and also that the tools that you'll see today are evolving with use. We just released the latest curated data repository data set was released last week. And that goes into the registered tier. We'll hear a little bit more, I think, as we go along about the controlled tier that's we're expecting to release later this year. And with that, we'll hopefully have where our intention is that we'll have, in addition to the data types that I've mentioned earlier, genomics, whole genome sequence data on about 90 to 100,000 folks. So it's great as it is, but it's going to be even better as we go along. So let me turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harris, for that wonderful look at the All of Us research program. Our next speaker is Dr. Adrienne Roman, who will discuss the research program and hub. Adrienne Roman, PhD, joined the All of Us Data and Research Center team as a scientific project manager on the research support and outreach team in January of 2020. Her primary efforts at the DRC are focused around the creation of training and educational materials for the researcher workbench, supporting program outreach with the goal of providing a better understanding of the utility of all of us data and workbench. Dr. Roman?
Thanks for the introduction, Ashley, and thank you so much for everyone taking your time out of your schedules to attend our Onramp today. Before jumping into the platform, I first just want to acknowledge and thank our participants and our community partners whose generous contributions have made all of this work possible. And next slide. And as you also saw on Dr. Harris's talk, we have a large, diverse group of consortium partners, including our own Vanderbilt University Medical Center, that are involved in supporting the program to make this work successful. And so, as you can see, we're just very fortunate to have such a strong network behind us. Next slide. The All of Us research program's mission is to accelerate health research and medical breakthroughs that will enable individualized prevention, treatment, and care for all of us. And we have identified a set of core values and objectives on which we have continued to build this program that will and guide us towards this mission. And one of the most important objectives is nurturing the relationship with all of our participant partners. Participants are included in the governance, invited to co-invent systems and give input into the science. They have choice to receive all data and information back to them as well. Through the contributions by our participant partners, we aim to create a diverse biomedical data set at the scale of 1 million or more people, with a specific focus on demographic, geographical, and medical diversity, and on populations that are underrepresented in biomedical research. And we want this platform to be easy, safe, and free to access. To do this, we need to build and maintain a strong All of Us team that's capable of achieving the program's mission. So ultimately, our work and everyone's contributions will catalyze a robust ecosystem that will accelerate health research and medical breakthroughs in precision medicine. Next slide. The majority of the presentations you'll be hearing today will highlight the uniqueness of our data set and our researcher workbench and how you can access the data set. But I'd like to spend a little time going in depth, a little more of what Dr. Harris mentioned about the behind the scenes work to get the data ready, how we collect, how we store, prepare the data that will be available for the access within the Research Hub platform. And this graph shows a concise outline of the flow of data through the program from the data that we collect from our participants through our data curation pipeline, and then how you access the All of Us data set in the Research Hub. So our research participants provide data through a collection of participant surveys. They can grant the program access to electronic health records, which include records not just moving forward from enrollment, but also retroactive access. So we'll have more complete and comprehensive EHR data for those participants who allow us that permission. Some participants have contributed physical measurements data that are taken by the participant's healthcare provider at time of enrollment. We also have expanded our data types to include wearable devices such as Fitbit, and we've been working with participant partners to collect biospecimen samples such as blood and saliva from our participants. And the first of these data will be made available later this year or early next, and that will be our genomics data. And now I want to talk a little bit about our data curation pipeline. So how the data that we collect from those participants gets prepared for the researchers to use. And so data are first stored in what we call our raw data repository at the Data and Research Center. And they go through data harmonization privacy methodology, which include removing personally identifying information from records and suppressing and generalizing data based on re-identification risk. And so after these data undergo conformance checks, the application of privacy methodology, the resulting data are referred to as our curated data repository. Next slide. Regarding access to the All of Us data set, our philosophy has always been to share widely and wisely. What this means is we want access to be broad and open, and we try to accomplish this by removing barriers for researchers. But we also need to be wise about how we share the data so that we're protecting our participant privacy. Next slide. So in order to balance this sharing widely and wisely, we have different levels of access to our data set, and we refer to these as tiers. So in this diagram, you can see our public tiers on the bottom. This reaches the broadest audience. It's accessible through our Research Hub public website, and it contains summary statistics and aggregated data. There's no participant level data available in the public tier. You can actually explore this data set right now by using our data browser tool on the Research Hub platform. And for these data, there's no login required or registration required for access. The next tier up is our registered tier, and this is available to researchers through our researcher workbench. And as the name implies, to access these data, you need to apply to be a registered researcher on our platform. The tier contains de-identified row-level participant data. And in this tier, because row-level data are accessible, we do suppress and generalize some of these data we consider risky for participant privacy. And also, we don't allow downloading of data from our workbench, and that's just another safeguard as well. And as Dr. Harris alluded to earlier, we will be launching a controlled tier in the near future. This will have even less restrictions and suppressions or generalizations on data that will be made available for research. And this will also include our genomics data. So next slide. So our data set includes data from currently over 329,000 participants. And the table on this slide shows a breakdown of the data types, such as survey data, including our COVID-19 participant experience or COPE survey, as well as physical measurements, EHR, and wearables or Fitbit data. So as you can see, we have a really rich data set available to our researchers right now. Next slide. And our data set's not only rich, but it's diverse. And we really want the All of Us data set to be an all-inclusive data set representing the diversity of the population as best we can. So that's one reason we have focused on bringing in those who are underrepresented in biomedical research. And that's referred to as UBR on this slide. And right now, currently, 78% of our participants fall in at least one of these UBR categories. Next slide. So the data set I just described is the data set available to researchers in the curated data repository. And again, as Dr. Harris mentioned earlier, we just released this updated data set last week. And we have made more data from we've added more data from the previous data set. So for example, we saw a large increase in Fitbit data. Now we have 37% more than we did in the previous data set, as well as our COVID participant experience survey, which we now have a 57% increase in data. So with each new data set release we have, which happens on average about twice a year, you'll have more data available for research. So to access these data, you'll first need to visit our Research Hub platform. So next slide. And that's what I'm going to walk you through now. And this is where you can learn more about and begin interacting with our data. So while I walk you through the Research Hub, I really encourage you to follow along and do some exploring by going to researchallofus.org. Next slide. So the Research Hub is a secure, publicly accessible Google Cloud-based platform that contains both a public and a controlled access portion. The publicly accessible portion of the Research Hub, the public website, is where you can access that public tier data set that I showed you earlier, and it provides researchers and participants and the public with general information about the program, privacy rules, and data access, detailed information about the types of data sources provided by participants, as well as methods used by the program to curate these data, direct access to custom tools designed to explore aggregated research data, frequently asked questions, and a monitored help desk. The restricted access portion of the Research Hub contains a researcher workbench. This is the portion that requires a researcher to register in the platform to gain access. And it's through this platform, and this is the platform that has our registered tier data set currently, that a researcher can access that row-level participant data. So meaning it's more detailed and it's de-aggregated, as well as unique tools to analyze the data within the workbench. And you'll hear more about the workbench in the upcoming presentations. Next slide. So on our Research Hub public website, we offer a variety of unique avenues for learning about our participants and interacting with the All of Us data set. And that includes our data snapshots, our Survey Explorer, and our data browser tools. Next slide. So under the Data and Tools tab on our public website, that's where you'll find data snapshots. And the data snapshots show the scale and the diversity of the All of Us research program participant cohort. The snapshots provide metrics of participant enrollment counts over time, so you can see how fast this program is growing and how close we're getting to that goal of 1 million or more participants. You can also see participant demographics and the geographic distribution of our participants to see where they're enrolling throughout the country. These snapshots are updated daily. Next slide. Also under the Data and Tabs tool is where you can find our Survey Explorer. So participants that are enrolled in our program have the opportunity to provide additional data by completing surveys. We have a core set of surveys that include the basics, overall health, and lifestyle. The core set collects information about our participants' work and home life, overall health. And after participants complete the core surveys, they may complete additional surveys on healthcare access, personal and family medical history, and other topics, including our COVID-19 participant experience or COPE survey, which was created and launched in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And that survey actually includes questions on COVID-19 symptoms, stress, social distancing, economic impacts, and it's longitudinal, so you can actually see how participants' responses change over time. Next slide. But your first access into the actual curated data set, the research data set that's at the end of that pipeline, is through our easy-to-use point-and-click data browser tool. And this is also found under the Data and Tools tab. And this allows you to explore and interact with our data directly. So on this data browser landing page shown here, participant data are divided into different data types to make navigating easier. So at the top, you'll see there's EHR domains where you can browse medical conditions present in participant EHR data, drug exposures, labs and measurements, and procedure data. We've also got survey data and physical measurements and wearables. And if you have a specific topic of interest and you're not sure where that data might be available within this data browser tool, you can type it in the search bar at the top of the screen and results will be generated automatically below, showing the types of data we had related to your search term. And that will also include how many participants have provided data related to the term. And then you can see breakdowns of counts by sex assigned at birth and age as well as you go into the data more. Next slide. And we're committed to being transparent with our participant partners about how their data are accessed, used, and shared. And we do this on the Research Hub website by making publications that have utilized the All of Us dataset available on the Research Hub under our publications section, which is under the Discover tab. And another way we do that is through our research projects directory. Next slide. So also under the Discover tab, our research projects directory is where you can read about all of the research actively going on in the Workbench to better understand the breadth and the diversity of the research occurring on our platform. And I want to quickly provide a little background about how we acquire the data that you see in this directory and simultaneously highlight a really unique feature of our Workbench. So All of Us employs a data passport model of access for registered users of our Workbench. This means that once a researcher has been granted access, they're free to conduct research without needing specific approval from the program for each project that they start, as long as this abides by the Data User Code of Conduct. This removes a significant time barrier for completing research and allows researchers flexibility in their projects. Researchers are asked, though, to provide us with a detailed description each time they create a new workspace in the platform. And that is where we pull information from and make it public here. And that includes scientific questions that are being studied by the researcher, the data that they'll be using in the research, how they plan on using it and analyzing it, and what they think they'll find. And those sections are marked as you complete your workspace descriptions for what will be displayed on this page. And we launched this platform about 1.5 years ago, and today are nearing 700 active projects in our Workbench, which is really amazing. Next slide. And here, just to give you an idea of the breadth of research being done, we generated a word cloud using those workspace descriptions. So this really can just highlight the diversity of research going on in our Workbench right now. And additionally, we launched our Spotlights page earlier this year. And this is a new feature that will be growing over time as an opportunity to highlight the work being done by researchers. So in this section, you'll hear directly from them, learning about their backgrounds, their research interests and goals. And this really helps bring a personal touch to the platform and provide the public with an opportunity to know the researchers who are accessing and leveraging their data that the participants so generously provide. So now I'm going to pass this over and you'll actually get to hear from current users of our Workbench on their experience using the data set and platform.
Thank you so much, Dr. Roman, for that look into the program and the Research Hub. We are honored to have 2 researchers with us to discuss their experiences working with the All of Us dataset and Workbench. First is Dr. Patrick Wu. Patrick Wu is currently an MD PhD student at Vanderbilt University. He completed his PhD in biomedical informatics. For his dissertation work, he focused on developing methods for integrating multi-omic and clinical data to answer biomedical research questions. Dr. Wu?
Do you mind going back a slide? Thank you. Thanks, Ashley. So hi, everyone. Thank you for coming today. I'm Patrick Wu. I'm excited to share my experience using the All of Us Researcher Workbench. Since there are students on this call, I focus my talk to describe how I incorporated All of Us for one of my dissertation projects. Next slide, please. So first, I wanted to start with acknowledgements. So this work was done in Dr. Wei-Chi Wei's lab, my PhD mentor. Also want to thank my PhD committee, co-authors on the project, and of course, funding support for the NIH. Next slide, please. So first, I want to provide some context to explain why All of Us was super important for my dissertation project. So I just returned to my last year of medical school this year after defending my PhD, which happened in March of this year. So about a month before my defense day, Dr. Wei and I met to discuss this project that I'm going to talk about, which leveraged All of Us. For this project, we spent about 3 years developing an analysis pipeline, but we had only demonstrated the pipeline in Vanderbilt's electronic health record, the synthetic derivative, and we hadn't yet replicated the pipeline in an independent database. And replication is not only expected when you submit for the paper for publication, but it would also give us more confidence in our results. Next slide, please. So we first discussed asking one of our collaborators in the eMERGE network to help us with replication analysis. But from previous experience, we predicted that we wouldn't get the results back in time to incorporate them both for my defense and when for submitting the paper. So in the meantime, we decided to see whether we could do the replication analysis in All of Us. Next slide. So at that time, we weren't sure how long this analysis was going to take since the beta researcher platform was released less than a year ago at that time, and no papers focused on biomedical discovery had been published at that time. Next slide, please. So luckily, it only took a week for me to complete the initial replication analysis in All of Us, which we were super happy about. And before describing my experience on how this was possible, I would like to just give a little bit of background on the research project. Next slide, please. So the research project was focused on developing a pipeline for identifying new uses for existing drugs. So identifying drug repurposing candidates. This is important in the space of drug development since developing a new drug, getting it approved is very expensive, and finding new indications can likely help address this problem. Next slide, please. So to describe the pipeline we built, imagine that you're trying to identify an existing drug for treating hyperlipidemia or to lower LDL cholesterol levels. So you first identify a candidate, test in clinical trials, and next slide, please. And if the drug candidate works, like if your drug candidate lowers LDL cholesterol significantly more than some placebo, then the FDA would approve the drug. Next slide, please. However, what more commonly occurs is that in drug repurposing clinical trials, they often fail due to a lack of efficacy. Next slide, please. So to address this problem, researchers have focused on improving this first step of identifying a drug candidate for clinical trial testing. Next slide, please. And this is especially common in the bioinformatics space. There are many studies that have been trying to do this. Next slide, please. So one popular method is using gene expression data. Here I'm showing up a relatively popular approach where you get patients with your disease of interest and those without. You look at which genes are upregulated and downregulated in those with the disease. Then you search through a drug database with gene expression data to find drugs that reverse that disease gene expression signature. Next slide, please. So the output from these studies is that they've been able to narrow the search space of 2,700 drugs to usually about less than 100, which, there's something, to be said about narrowing that search space. But it doesn't really help clinical trial investigators choose among, because 100 is still a long list of which drugs to test for clinical trials. Next slide, please. So again, the output, you'll get, oh, this is a good candidate, this is not a good candidate. But from an efficacy standpoint, investigators want to know, okay, which of these drugs are most likely to have the largest treatment effect? Next slide, please. So the result of these bioinformatics studies, it's a large achievement, but none of the candidates identified using this approach have led to an FDA approval. Next slide, please. So for this project, we built a pipeline to integrate gene expression data and clinical data to prioritize candidates. Next slide, please. So the pipeline broken down to two submodules. On the left here, this part is not new, what I just described. The second part on the right, the validation module, is a novel contribution where we use EHR data to measure treatment effects of drug candidates identified from the first module. Next slide, please. So here is just a forest plot that summarizes a subset of the drugs that we tested. So on the vertical axis here, you have the different drugs. On the horizontal axis, you have their treatment effect. So when patients were treated with the drug here, on average, what was the decrease in LDL cholesterol? So since this was a proof of concept demonstration for this pipeline, one of our main goals was to see whether we could rediscover known drugs. And if you look at the top here, a lot of these drugs are statin drugs. So the drugs that are most commonly used to lower LDL cholesterol. So we're super excited about this. And for each drug here, there are two colors. So first, like looking at the top row here, on torvastatin, we see this red square with a confidence interval. So this is the effect that we saw in LDL cholesterol in the synthetic derivative. And looking a little bit, moving down a little bit to the blue circle here, and with the confidence interval is what we saw in the All of Us data set. And so they're pretty comparable. So again, we were more confident in the pipeline when we saw this result. Next slide, please. So the result of this pipeline is, instead of outputting a list of drug candidates, we were able to measure the treatment effects of the drug candidates from the gene expression studies that will hopefully make it easier for investigators to figure out which drug candidates to test in clinical trials. Next slide, please. So going back to how we were able to replicate this pipeline in 1 week. Next slide, please. So the same day that I met with Dr. Wei, again, this is about a little bit over a month before my defense day, I applied for what Adrienne was talking about. I applied for the registered tier to get access to row level, individual level data in all of us. And so this was, writing up the research description, going through the training required to get access. So I was pretty motivated at this point. So I was, able to get it done in a couple of days. So 2 days later, after I applied for access, that's when I was able to get access to the row level data. And so 5 days later, after I started the analysis, I was able to then complete the initial replication analysis. Next slide, please. And I was able to do this in a week because of two major features. First, I was able to use the same programming languages for data extraction from the curated data repository, processing, and analysis. Next slide, please. And like Paul was talking about, since both the curated data repository in all of us and the equivalent in the synthetic derivative use the same common data model, I had already learned how to shape data from that initial raw structure to what I needed for analysis. Next slide, please. But there were a couple of roadblocks that I encountered when I started using all of us. First was changing how I shaped and extracted data from the curated data repository to my processing workflow in R. In the synthetic derivative, I did this by creating multiple subtables, but this wasn't possible in all of us. So this required reconfiguring code to create long sub queries. Next slide, please. And the other major difference was differences in computing environment. So a lot of my work processing and analysis is done on a server. There are no explicit charges with using a server versus all of us, where it costs about 20 cents, which is actually not that much per hour to use it. But I was like very careful. So I had $300 initial credit to use the Google Cloud Platform, but I was careful in pausing the environment. But that said, I might have been a little bit too careful, where I only used less than $20 to complete the rest of the analysis, including optimizing it and getting data for publication. And the second major difference was in all of us, or the Google Cloud Platform, you don't just save data to like a folder. There's this extra step where you move the data to a storage bucket that you can then recover later. So yep, next slide. So that's it. Thank you, everyone.
We're going to continue our exploration of the Research Hub and take a look at the Workbench with Dr. Hiral Master. Dr. Master, PT, PhD, MPH, is a licensed physical therapist, certified public health professional, and has a PhD in clinical and translational research. Starting in June of 2021, she works as a scientific project manager for the All of Us Data and Research Center. At the Data and Research Center, she focuses on initiatives related to digital health data and outreach activities within educational research settings. Dr. Master?
Thank you so much, Ashley, for that introduction. And thank you so much, all of the attendees, for being at our presentation. I really appreciate that. And I want to thank all the speakers who gave good platform, and I hope they have stimulated some interest that you guys really want to access the register tier data, like row level data. So the purpose of my talk is to basically just give you like a sneak peek, like how you can register and get access and play with this data. So the researcher workbench is what is called like the secure enclave. So this is where you would basically get like a row level data, de-identified data. Next slide. So as of now, we have the EHR survey, physical measurements, COPE survey, and Fitbit data. And the data is just refreshed, as my colleagues, Dr. Harris and Dr. Roman mentioned, on September 22nd. And stay tuned, we will have genomics data coming up soon. So there's like tons of data on the researcher workbench for you guys to play around. Next slide. Before I dive in how to register, I want to tell you what is the diversity of our researchers. So our platform was launched like in May 2020. And since the launch, we have like more than 1,000 researchers who have been enrolled on this platform. And these researchers, they are diverse, like they range from being an undergrad student to a PhD. So anyone can basically, who is interested in playing around with the data, can register on this workbench. And also, if you see the role, they can be they can be as early as being a student to as late as being like a late career researcher. So we have like pretty diverse people who are using this data set. Next slide. Right now, we have around 600 workspaces which have been created. Next slide. And these before I dive in, I want to say like currently, most of the researchers focus on disease and methods development research. And the top 3 diseases which have been investigated on like using all of us data, at least as of now, is cancer, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. But again, as my colleagues mentioned, you can do COVID, you can do mental health. There are like tons of diseases that you can study using all of us data. Next slide. So now I hope you guys are super interested in how do we actually register? How do we actually get into this workbench? Next slide. So if you go to this researchallofus.org website, there'll be a button called Apply button, which is on the top side of the website. When you click that button, there'll be 6 steps which will pop up. So next slide. So the first step is all the steps that my colleague Dr. Roman mentioned, like what public tools are available, just to give you familiarity whether all of us data is feasible for your research question. Once you see that, oh yeah, it has like Fitbit data, oh, it has physical measurements data, I can definitely use this data for my research, then you can go to the next, step number 2. So next slide is to check the institution, and you can look whether your institution is present or not by going on this website, like institutional agreement. Next slide. I'll just say, like, since majority of our attendees are from VUMC, Mehavi Medical College, or National Software School, you guys have already completed the step number 2. So you guys don't have to worry about doing step number 2. However, if you have any colleagues, like if you have PhD friends who are in another institution who do not fall in this institutional list, then don't worry, you can also share this information to them. So next slide. All you have to tell is like you can submit the request. And when you submit the request, like it's only for people who belong to institutions who do not have this institutional agreement in place. You can just submit the request. Next slide. And when the researcher submits the request, the VUMC, like the Data and Research Center, gets that request, and then we basically contact the institutional contracting officer. And once the contract has been signed up and the DURA is approved, basically VUMC adds an institution's name on the website, and then the institution is all set. So it's a pretty simple process. So again, I want to highlight that this data set is available for all. It's for all institutions. Next slide. Then the step number 3 to 6 is what it gets to get registered as a researcher. And this, go to the next slide, please. And these steps can be completed either in one setting or you can take breaks. Like it doesn't have to be done like depending on your schedule. Like let's say if you have an experiment or you have a patient that you have to see, and you just have 10 minutes right now. You can finish 10 minutes of the steps in one sitting, and you can complete other steps at other times. So you don't have to worry about doing it in one go. Like all you have to do is you have to verify your identity by going into login.gov, and then you have to complete this basic researcher training. It's similar to the city training, where you just have to go through this, what is the responsible research training that you will abide to, like you will not do any stigmatization research. And once you complete that training and sign the user code agreement, you're all set. Like you are a registered researcher and you can play with the data. So next slide. In any event, if you have any questions, there's also like a help button at the bottom of the website, and you can leave message, you can put any question, or you can report any issue you have. And trust me, our support team will get back to you within 1 to 2 business days. They're pretty responsive, so you will hear back on your concerns pretty soon. Next slide. And for all the new registered researchers, I just want to put a plug in. Like, if you're like a new registered researchers who have just signed in, don't worry, we have a new user orientation, and you can basically use this Zoom link to register for that. And it is like during this orientation, like we have like our experts who will walk you through if you have any questions, and it's like an amazing resource that is available for you guys. Next slide. So now let's say you guys are registered, you guys have attended new user orientation, or even if you guys haven't attended new user orientation, you can simply dive into the researcher workbench. It's pretty, it has a lot of point and click tools. So basically you can start playing with it, and you can start experimenting like how it would help to further like either your PhD thesis, or maybe your postdoc, or maybe your grant application. You can start playing around with it. So next slide. So once you go, like once you're registered, you will get like a username and password. So if you go again to that researchallofus.org, you will have a researcher login. And when you click researcher login, you'll get a new window, and you just have to sign in, like how you sign in into your Gmail account. Basically use your username and password, and you can basically then get into this registered like researcher workbench. Next slide. So this is what the landing page of researcher workbench looks like. This is what all my colleagues who have been using this data, so like Dr. Wu and Dr. Britton, who did their research, they basically use this researcher workbench to basically use the data from all of us. Next slide. And one nice feature of this researcher workbench is it has like quick tours and videos. So if anytime you want any refresher, like, oh my God, I just want to know what this specific tool is, don't worry, they are like 3 minutes videos, like less than 3 minutes video down on the researcher workbench, and you can play it anytime to get like a kind of like a refresher. Next slide. Now this is a place what my colleague Dr. Roman was referring to, like the workspace. If you want to play with all of us data, you have to create a workspace. The data that you enter in the workspace is what is available in the research project directory. The reason we have this step, because we want to ensure transparency, not only to our researchers, but also to our participants. Like we want our participants also to know like what's going on with their data. So next slide. So when you click this new workspace, you would get like this new window where you can then write in all the details, like why are you using this workspace? Like what is like the scientific objectives? It's kind of like you can take a lot of the stuff from, if you have a grant application or something like that, like you can write in your specific aims, hypothesis, your approach. You can fill in all those details. Next slide. And I want to highlight like this workspace is highly collaborative. So it's not like you will be doing it on your own. Like you can add your collaborators, like you can add your PhD mentors, or you can add coders, biostatistician, you can add n number of people, but however, you can only add people who are registered user. So, but there's no restriction that I can only add 5 people or 6 people. You can add any number of people. So next slide. So if you go onto the researcher workbench, there's like a 3 icon. And when you like the 3 dots, when you click on 3 dots, you will have the share option. Next slide. And then when you hit that share option, you can then add collaborators. So it's like you can give like some collaborators read access or write access or being a co-owners. So as I mentioned before, like some collaborators will help you with maybe your R or Python coding language. Some may help you with, some may be clinicians, some may be a biostatistician, anyone. So like it's highly collaborative. Next slide. So this is where the collaborators would look like. So as I mentioned, like, and this, again, this information is something that would be shared to public. So this information would be available in the research project directory, because we want to make sure that everyone is aware like who is leading this project and who are the people who are involved with this project. So it also further enhances transparency. Next slide. The another interesting tool that I want to like really talk about is like a cohort builder and dataset builder. Again, these are like some pre-built like click and point or like, click and point tools. Like you can just like do like, okay, I'm just going to click it and I'm going to build my data sets, and you can use these tools to basically clean your data and make analytical data set ready before you can dive into analysis using the using the Python or R coding language. So next slide. So the cohort builder is basically if you go on data and if you just click on cohort, next slide. It basically tells you, allows you to add the inclusion and exclusion criteria. So especially in everyone, when we're doing our research, we would have certain inclusion, exclusion criteria. So if I want to do research on only older adults, maybe my exclusion criteria is adults age over 65. Or let's say if I want to do research on only people who have some kind of physical measurements. So maybe that I can put that in my inclusion criteria. So once you enter all your inclusion and exclusion criteria, you can basically then have like a pop-up window, which will tell you like how much is the total sample size that meets your inclusion and exclusion criteria, and what is the socio-demographic diversity, like how many, like what is the diversity in terms of age, what is the diversity in terms of sex, gender orientation. So you can get all this information beforehand before even diving in deep into the data. It is like super informative. Next slide. So once your cohort is built up, once you apply this inclusion and exclusion criteria, this dataset builder tool basically allows you to add what data types or like what variables you want in your data set. So basically if you're, you can then select, oh, I want gender, I want Fitbit data, I want EHR data, like depending like what type of data you want, you just have to go to your data sets. And next slide. When you go onto your data set, you will get this pop-up window where you can select either pre-built concept sets, or you can even select your own values. Like you can basically select what kind of columns or data types you need with, like to get ready with your analysis. So that's pretty like, and you can preview your data set. It's like you can preview first 50 rows of your data. You can see, okay, this exactly looks like how I want my data to be organized, or like what I want. So you can preview your data set. So, and then once you are happy with how the data set looks like, you can then click on create data set. Next slide. This finally tells like, okay, now you have built your analytical data set. Now let's dive in deeper into doing like your analysis. So right now we have, you can only do your analysis using Jupyter notebooks. And remember, all these analysis and all these data building have been done on Google Cloud environment. So anyone who is a registered researcher, each one of you will get 300 credits. And this 300 credits, based on our experience, have been sufficient enough for the researchers till date. However, so this is like a Google Cloud environment. So you would, and each owner, so the credits will come from each owner. So let's dive in deeper for the Jupyter notebooks. Next slide. So you just click on analysis, and when you click on analysis, you will see this page where you will see like create new codebook. Next slide. And when you click new codebook, Here you will see an option of selecting either Python or R coding language. So depending on your comfort level, or if you have any collaborators, depending on the comfort level of your group, you can select any one particular language. Next slide. And then you can start coding and like, you know, you can do anything. It's just like how you do like statistical analysis in R software. Basically, you can do the exactly same thing in this Jupyter notebook. Exactly the same thing. You can put like titles, subtext, headings, and all kind of codes. You can import like libraries. You can do whatever you want to do in this Jupyter notebook. Next slide. I want to highlight one important feature is like we have featured workspaces. So if you click onto the researcher workbench, there are already some pre-built code snippets, or like there are already pre-built some workspaces. So in case if your coding preference is not like R or Python, but you want to see how other researchers, or like how can I get started? So how can I get started working with physical measurements data? So you can click on one of these pre-built workspace, and you can even copy it to your own environment. And you can basically use this code. It's completely, there's nothing plagiarism, there's nothing like that. You can just copy that code and you can start playing with your own research project. Next slide. Again, like the second important tool that I really want to highlight is we have User Support Hub. So when you click on User Support Hub, there'll be like, we have community forums where you can just post in the questions, like you can talk with other people in the community. We have a lot of FAQs. If you have questions, maybe someone else may have already had that question and we may have incorporated that within the FAQs. We have a lot of documentation for you to refer to it. And regardless, if you have any question related to the researcher workbench, you can always submit a request. Like we have office hours, and you can basically come to our office hours and basically get advice if you're getting stuck anywhere in the researcher workbench, or let's say if your cloud environment is acting weirdly, it's not working the way you like, something is going wrong, you can just submit a request, or you can even come to our office hours and basically get your questions answered. Thank you so much. Next slide. And yep, I would like to open it up to question and answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Master, for discussing the workbench and how to get started on a research project with all of us. We will now open the floor for Q&As. If you have any questions to ask our panelists or our team at the Data and Research Center, please drop them in the Q&A that you see on the bottom of your screen. You may also click on the raise hand icon and wait to be called on. We'll look at our Q&As, and our first question we have is, how do I bypass ERA Commons registration to go to login.gov since my Commons account is connected to login.gov?
I think, and like, again, so like when you click on, if you already have your login.gov, you should just be able to use that credentials and you should be able to access it. Right?
So right now, if you're having issues with bypassing, please reach out to our support team, and I'll drop this in the chat. They're currently working on a way to identify a solution to that particular issue that you're talking about. So let me drop this in here, and if you'll just reach out to them, they can help you move forward in that. Oh, sorry, that's wrong. I have a typo in there.
And while you're typing that up, Dr. Roman, I'll move on to our second question, if that's all right with you.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so our next question is, any chance future demographic surveys plan to include language background? For example, how many different languages in the family and who speaks and understands what?
Again, I think that's a great question, and I think that's a great feedback. Right now, if I just go to the Survey Explorer, I don't think we have the information on languages that are spoken in the family, but that's something.
While Hiral's looking, that is something that we always like to hear is feedback on what type of information that we may not have currently that you would like us to provide. We do develop surveys over time that will be providing researchers with the opportunity to complete. So if there are types of information or data such as this that you would like us to consider adding in, please reach out to our support team. Again, you can reach out through the email that I dropped in the chat or on the icon on our public website, and let us know if there's data that you don't see that you'd like to access, surveys, questions you'd like us to incorporate in future surveys potentially. We do love to hear the feedback on that.
Just one point I'd like to make as well is Hiral said that I'm going to go check on the data browser to see what we have there. I just dropped a link into the chat window that gives the link for researchallofus.org, and there's a great exploratory tool called the data browser there that you're welcome to review and pour through. But as Adrienne said, if you don't see things that you would expect to see or you're interested in, let us know. Robert Markowitz asked about microbiome data. That one, we're in one of the things that's sort of in the works right now is using the platform for ancillary studies. So doing a deeper dive deeper dive on certain diseases, certain populations. The ancillary studies could be a number of could be designed in a number of different ways. But one of the first ancillary study will be called the Precision Nutrition Health Program, and so as part of that nutrition ancillary study, we are expecting to get microbiome data on somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 10,000 participants, I think. And the details of that are still fluid, but that's the answer to that question about the microbiome data.
I just want to highlight that I just actually basically went on the data browser and I just typed language. There seems there's a language screening question, and that's something you can explore if that is something you are looking for. Again, it doesn't talk about language that people and family members speak, but there's some language screening question that is there on the data browser.
I'm sorry, please go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say there was another comment there about how language will be prioritized in the upcoming social determinants of health survey. And that's another good reminder that the program is not static. In fact, it's evolving all of the time. And so as part of the initiative, the larger program initiative, one of the surveys that are coming out very soon is this social determinants of health survey. And those data will then be collated in a future release of the data set.
Great. And just to be mindful of time, we're going to move on from our Q&A. Thank you all for your questions. If you do have any more questions for us that you were not able to get an answer to, you are always welcome to email us at support@researchallofus.org. And I see that Cassie has put that email in the chat for us. Okay. So we are very excited that you could join us all today. Thank you again to our panelists for sharing your insights and your work with us. We hope you will register with us and join our growing community of researchers. Our next new user orientation is October 15th at 1 p.m. And we'd also love to have your feedback on today's presentation. Please take a moment to fill out our survey. The link was placed in the chat earlier today, or toward the beginning of the presentation, as well as the link to sign up for our newsletter. So if you'd like to sign up to receive our quarterly newsletter, please follow the link there, as that was also in the chat. And if you are interested in presenting your testimonial or your work at future events, we would love to have you join us. And you can email me at ashley.e.green@vumc.org. So thank you again so much to our speakers, and thank you so very much for joining us. And we hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks.
Thank you.